My upbringing was all right. I wouldn't say it was particularly terrible or anything. I grew up in a small town in the north of England. I did have a few family difficulties at home because my older brother was autistic, but my mum and dad didn't bother getting him diagnosed or didn't think it was a good idea to get him diagnosed because they didn't want him to be labelled. So they just treated him like he was normal, but that'd mean they'd leave us in the same room as him and he'd literally just like flick us and poke us for hours on end and was very relentless. He didn't seem to have normal conception of when to stop annoying someone. So throughout my formative years, I was basically tormented by him constantly, which wasn't great. And I think possibly gave me a few issues in later life. And my parents were quite strict and authoritarian, and they had the mindset that if there was a problem involving the children, it wasn't just the fault of the one that was doing it, it was all of our faults, basically, to some degree. So when he would do stuff to annoy us, like flick us repeatedly for like 5 hours or something, we'd also get into trouble for it. Which, looking back, I think they didn't really. They were at their wits' end really because they didn't know how to handle him. So I think when we made a fuss about it, they were just like, "Oh God, I'll just tell everyone off to try and make it stop," because it must have been a difficult situation for them as well. But I think that was a major impact during childhood that possibly affected me and has stayed with me into later life. But apart from that, it was okay. Just a normal sort of small town suburban life, really. I think the first time I ever actually came across drugs was when I was about 15, and we used to go and play football at like a local field, and there was an older lad there who's like 2 years older. He used to sell little bits and bats of weed, and some people there had smoked weed. I never smoked it while I was there because I thought if I was going to smoke it, I'd rather smoke it sort of in a relaxed environment where I wasn't going straight back to my own house at the end. So if I had the effects of it, it wouldn't get picked up on by my parents. So I smoked a bit of weed later. I think I was at school actually. I brought it to school and smoked it with a friend there, which looking back, not great logic considering I didn't want to take it when I was going straight back to my own house, but going into lessons and stuff, I wasn't really that bothered about. But I didn't get much of an effect from weed, to be honest. It wasn't like that extreme for me. I know these things affect different people in different ways, so it was never really that much of an issue, and I never got caught or anything. Okay, so I guess the first ever criminal thing I did was buy small amounts of weed and take them into school to sell to someone. But to be honest, it was very petty. I'd just sort of take in one spliff and sell it on. I wasn't really a drug dealer or anything. Well, not a proper one. That was when I was about 15. I think that was just me trying to be rebellious, really. Wasn't even in need of any money or anything like that. I just had a bit of a rebellious streak because I think of what I said about the authoritarian parents. I think I was rebelling a little bit against authority. and that was probably part of it. Well, I started experimenting with some harder drugs, not like really hard drugs, but magic mushrooms and amphetamines and ecstasy whilst I was at university. And I realised that they were fun. I enjoyed doing them. And also, I was still a bit rebellious because although I was an adult, like I was 18, I was still a child in my head in some ways and quite immature and was sort of rebelling against my authoritarian upbringing. And um, I started selling small amounts just to make enough money for my own night out. Um, and to be honest, it was all pretty low level. I mean, I wasn't like a big drug dealer or anything like that. Right, well, me and a couple of friends used to go to this nightclub in quite a shady part of the city, and there was a lot of people openly selling drugs in there. Like the door staff were selling drugs pretty openly. You'd walk in, they'd just have a big bag of ecstasy, and there was a table in there with a guy selling weed on a stall. Um, it was all pretty open, like no one really disguised it. And it turned out that a girl I knew one of the door staff. So I was quite intrigued at finding out the ins and outs of it all, like how it worked, if they all worked as one unit. And so I thought I'll try and get in with them. My judgment was a bit impaired at the time because obviously I was taking club drugs. Uh, so I got her to introduce me to this bouncer, and he said that I could sell some drugs in there for him if I gave him half the profit, which there was a huge market in there because everyone in the place was basically taking drugs. So I did it for one day, but unfortunately, I ended up taking quite a bit myself, and in a huge error of judgment, I went and asked one of the other drug dealers for advice, and I said I had a slow spell, so I said, "Oh, how are you getting your customers?" And obviously, I was on drugs at the time, so I was incredibly trusting, which was a bit ridiculous because the guy that I asked looked like a pimp. He had like a big flowing purple tunic of some sort on and like a little beret and literally looked like a pimp. And he said, "Oh, yeah, I'll sell these drugs for you and give you the money." So I thought, "Oh, what a nice bloke." Obviously, my head was not in a good place at the time because he was the last person on earth that I should have trusted. So I gave him some of them and he said, "All right, I'll sell them." And then the guy that I was working for came back later and he said, "Oh, how are you doing?" And I said, "Oh, I've just given one of the other workers some of the drugs to sell." So he was pretty pissed off. So he went to the other guy and basically I think he got most of the drugs back. There was like a few missing, but he said to me, like, first rule, don't trust anyone. And I thought, yeah, fair dues. Like, I wouldn't have trusted anyone if I wasn't fucked. But he was a bit pissed off, and by that stage, I think he was thinking, "Fucking hell, this kid's more hassle than he's worth." And then, um, as the night progressed, I sold a fair amount, not a huge amount, but I hid all the money like in my underwear and in my socks and stuff. So when it came to counting up the cash, it was all over the place. It took me ages to retrieve it and give the guy his half, and he was getting pissed off. And I thought, I don't think I'll come back and do this another day. I don't think the guy wanted me there either. I can't remember if he specifically made it clear that I was unwelcome, but he gave off that kind of vibe, so I didn't come back again after that. But it was quite a wild club. Like, there's all these Jamaican guys there selling drugs. All the clientele were university students, and the whole setup of it was basically seemed to be geared towards giving these people clients to sell drugs to. So it was quite an interesting experience, but I was a complete idiot. Right, basically, an undercover policeman infiltrated a group of my friends and he asked them, he asked one of them if he could get any ecstasy. And so the guy gave him my number. I think, looking back, I might have been under surveillance from when I was selling the drugs in that nightclub, because later in my probation reports, the probation officer was asking loads of questions about ketamine, which I was also alleged to have been selling. But the undercover police, nothing was mentioned to them about ketamine, so there was no way that they would have actually known. So I think they might have been attempting to snare me because of some intelligence. Maybe they were after the network of dealers that were selling in the club, and they thought I'd be a good way of getting into them, or they thought I was part of a bigger unit or something like that. But basically, this undercover cop got my phone number, rang me up, I met him, sold him something, and then months later, obviously, the police came to the house and I got arrested. The first day of prison, you get took from the court cells into like a big holding cell. And obviously, you're feeling pretty nervous and stuff because there's guys with big scars all over the face. There's people with big tattoos of like demons and stuff up their backs. And like the most heavily tattooed people you've ever seen in your life. And sort of people are all wide eyed and wild looking. There's people just coming from the street and withdrawing from drugs and stuff. So you're like locked in a really small room with them all. And then you're took to a cell on the induction wing, which is like a unit that everyone's put in when they first come into the prison to ease you into things gradually. The induction wing only had about 5 people on, so it was all right. There's another student on there who got caught doing a similar thing to me, but on a bigger scale. So I had someone of a similar background, which was good, because everyone else was like drug addicts. Um, and it was quite chilled on the induction wing, to be fair. So the first couple of days were quite relaxed, but then I had to see an officer because they speak to you before you go on the main wing and like clue you up on a few things. And she said, "Have you got any questions?" Uh, and she told me what wing I was going on. And she said, I think it was E-Wing or something like that. And I said, "Yeah, what's it like?" And she said, "Oh, it's the worst wing. It's got a big gang problem." And I thought, oh, shit. So that night, not a lot of sleep, really. It was pretty obviously going into prison. It was like a different world, and the worst thing wasn't being unsafe or anything like that, to be honest. The worst thing was the culture shock, because you've just got to learn to exist in a completely different environment with different rules, people talking different like slang words that you don't know, like using all criminal slang and stuff, and you don't know how the system works as people have been in and out their whole lives, and there's a lot of information to take in. You just plucked from out of your world and put in a completely different world that you don't fully understand, and that in itself is quite traumatic. Yeah, there were a few times when I sort of felt at risk of violence. I wasn't actually subjected to any violence, but there's a few times when I was threatened and stuff like that. But your alliances are pretty important in prison. So if someone's threatening you, you can get someone else who's higher up in the hierarchy to sort it out. And I think also in British prisons, there's a lot of people who are hard and who can fight, who look out for weaker people, which sort of shows the best of humanity, that even in a population where people are supposed to be the worst of the worst, there are good people that will help those who are in need. So fortunately, like I never encountered any. I never was actually subject to any proper violence, just a few threats here and there. I didn't see as much violence as you'd think, to be honest. I think there's not a lot of violence in British prisons compared to American ones. The stuff you see on TV about America, it's a whole different ball game. There were little bits and bats of violence, like a few fights and a couple of people getting hit with stuff, like things in socks normally, pool balls or cans of tuna or that type of thing. But I think more often there's a lot of fights in people's cells out of the way. So you didn't see a lot of violence because it was obviously they wouldn't want to do it in front of the guards. So it'd be in somewhere where not a lot of people would see it. I saw a stab wound where someone had been stabbed who'd got into an argument with his cellmates, but obviously I didn't actually see it because again it was behind closed doors. And there was a riot in there on another wing while I was in there. I just saw guards running past in like riot gear and that type of thing, but I didn't actually see anything of that. And that's pretty much it. Not like anything you'd find in the US. There's sort of groups of lads that knock about together, organise packages of drugs coming into the prison, and sell drugs together. Like there's sort of a rough leader who gives the orders, but there's not proper gangs really. There's street gangs, there's members of gangs from the outside, like the Johnsons and the Burgers and all that type of stuff, but they're not really that active, at least in the prisons I was in, behind bars. There's even members of groups that were rivals on the outside that are friendly with each other in prison just because they're in close proximity with each other and they've basically got to get on. And there's groups of lads from the same area that knock about together and like groups of mates and stuff. Some people are a bit territorial, like there's groups of lads from one area sit at one table, like one town or city, but there's not really, at least in the prisons I was in, there wasn't like a serious gang rivalry or anything. It was incredibly easy to get drugs in there. Not all drugs, but like mainly the drugs that people took in there were mainly heroin substitutes. It wasn't always easy to get hold of even heroin in there, to be honest. That came in little waves. Most of the stuff that people took was either legal medication that was like traded and sold, or like heroin substitutes, which were incredibly easy to get hold of. Like every second person was selling them. No, I wasn't tempted to take any drugs at all in prison, really, because the drugs that people take in there and the drugs that are available is stuff like heroin and weed and all types of legal medications that are exchanged, like heroin substitutes and stuff like that. But I was taking stimulants when I was outside, which you can't really get that much in prison. They tend to come in over Christmas, and sometimes they come in little batches, but generally they're not that easy to get hold of. And also on the outside, I sometimes took hallucinogens, which you just wouldn't want to do in prison because it'd be pretty terrifying. I heard about people taking acid tabs and stuff in there, which I'd never do in a million years. It's when you've got people that have killed people and like proper clinical psychopaths, you really don't want to be tripping. Not having any time to yourself. People think you've got loads of time to yourself in prison, but you haven't really, because you're in a very small room with someone else, like literally just above you, and it's difficult to do something that doesn't involve them. Like when you're watching the TV, they're talking to you, you're there writing a letter, they're interrupting you every 2 minutes. I think a lot of people in prison don't know how to have any time to themselves as well. So they won't sit and quietly do something. Like everything has to be communal. And your cell door opens, the minute it opens, there's like loads of people in your cell. Or, well, in one of the prisons I was in, you weren't allowed other people in your cells, but in the second, you'd have loads of people like hanging out in your cell. And one of the cells that I was in, there was drugs getting sold from by my cellmate. So it was all full of people like wrapping up drugs to take out and sell. So I'd go in there. You can't have any time to yourself to just relax because it's full of people like charging mobile phones and having little discussions about getting stuff thrown over the walls. And it's just like uh, a sort of communal room rather than your own little room. And also, there was like a constant lingering threat of violence, even though there wasn't a lot of violence. Like, the best way to describe it is when you're in the outside world, you take your safety for granted. When you're in there, although you are safe most of the time, you have to sort of politic and negotiate to stay safe. So you're never really fully relaxed. There was the time when someone tried to get me to smuggle heroin in on a home visit. After you'd been in for a certain amount of time, they'd let you go for 1 day at home. Um, I think it was when you were eligible for transfer to an open prison, but before you'd actually been transferred, because I never got to an open prison, but I got the status that would have allowed me to do that at some point. So at that point, they asked me if I wanted a home visit, and someone else got word of that. and was saying, "You go to the toilet while you're." 'Cause it's not. You don't just have to go home on the home visit. It's called a rottle, which is released on temporary license, so you can, go into town or something like that instead. Uh, he said, "You go into this pub in town. One of my mates will meet you, give you some heroin." And he said the heroin will be crafted into the shape of a dildo, and you shove it up your arse, shove this big dildo of heroin up your arse, and smuggle it back in, and we'll give you some cash. And I was like, no, that's not something that I want to do. And he took me to one side and was quite threatening and was like, "You're going to be moving off this wing unless you do it." So I had to subtly cancel the home visit with the guard and then claim it had all fallen through and I wasn't allowed it anymore. So that was quite memorable because I would have been I would have been forced into smuggling a big dildo of heroin into prison if I hadn't managed to wiggle out of that one. Yeah, it was all right. I wasn't really that stressed or anything. Some people say it's really stressful being released, but I didn't think so. It was just sort of normal. I mean, there's some things that are a bit weird. Seeing people with long hair was weird because I was used to seeing everyone with a shaven head. Everyone looked really non-threatening in the outside world. Um, that's pretty much it. I think the main misconception is probably that you're going to get bummed in the showers. That's the one that everyone always brings up. And there is actually some prison rape. I did hear about a few incidents, but it's few and far between. Few and far between. And if someone gets caught doing it, they're basically going to get run off the wing. It's not tolerated. And also, I think the people overestimate the level of violence. There is some violence in prison, but it's normally between two people that choose to get in a fight with one another rather than people getting victimised. I've heard young offenders is a lot different, and that is a lot more violent. And I think some high security prisons, there's a bit more violence and a bit more serious violence. But in the prisons I was in, the main threat, well, should I say, the main bad thing in there wasn't violence, it was self harm. People slashing themselves, people cutting holes in their arms, setting themselves on fire, some people swallowing razor blades and stuff like that. The self harm was a lot more harrowing and more widespread than any type of violence. Just getting on with my life, really. I've not been involved in any major criminal capers or anything like that since getting out, thank God. I was on license for quite a while after I came out, so abided by the license conditions, which was pretty easy. I had quite a good probation officer that I got on with. It was quite funny because my probation centre must have been some type of hotspot for drug dealing, presumably because all the dealers knew the spot from going to probation themselves and all the addicts and stuff like that. So I used to go into probation and there was like all types of dodgy deals going on and people exchanging things and money in the street, etc. So maybe not the best position for a probation centre there. They're not, not a good place to get sent to every week. But I didn't get involved in anything like that, and just for the most part kept my nose clean with the odd little minor uh, thing every now and again where I might have done something minorly illegal, but no more than your average person. Yeah, that was a bit weird. I should really have learnt my lesson, but I think I did learn my lesson from prison, but it took a little while. Like, it wasn't instantaneous when I came out. I pondered over the whole experience over a couple of years and came to the conclusion that it's probably not a good idea to do anything illegal. But before that, I was on a night out and I bought some speed off someone, and it was like a weird consistency. It was like molten ice cream. I've never really seen it like that before, so I didn't know how much to take. So I ended up taking too much, and I started feeling horrible. So I bought an ecstasy pill off someone, thinking that it'd make me feel a bit better and like pick me up. Unfortunately, it didn't really have that effect. I was speaking to someone, and suddenly, sort of every fourth word that he said, I'd hear the sound, but there'd be no meaning attached to it. So the bit in my head responsible for interpreting the meaning of words had gone haywire. So I was having trouble understanding what he said. I went to reply, and I could only remember the words from the previous sentence that I'd said to him. So I was repeating this sentence to him, like trying to be understood. Obviously, my brain was cabbaged at this point, and his face suddenly went into a diamond, and that diamond split up into like loads of little diamonds, all with his face in, and they whizzed around the room. And at that point, I was thinking, fuck, like, speed is not meant to do this. Like, it's not a hallucinogen. Uh, and then I was tripping out, seeing all types of weird stuff. I got to the point where I was so fucked that I didn't even realise this stuff wasn't supposed to be happening. And when I woke up, I was in hospital with all tubes coming out of me, and I couldn't remember how I'd got in there. But the bad thing was that the bloke who'd sold me the speed had sold me. I wanted to buy a gram, but he said he'd give me an eighth for the price of a gram, which possibly was a bit suspicious. There might have been something wrong with the speed, I don't know. He had some reason why he'd given me it, but I had that on me in the hospital. So I woke up, my head was a bit fucked, like my vision was all cartoony, which lasted for a full week after I was released. And I was really paranoid because I had enough speed to get me sent back to prison in my sock. So, all in all, that wasn't a great experience. And I think that's the last time I ever took drugs. So, maybe that was like the kick up the arse that I needed. And nowadays, I lead a pretty law abiding life. I don't really do anything that's illegal. So, that's at least something good that's come from it. I don't know. I can't really say whether it'd be a good thing or a bad thing to make drugs legal, to be honest. I know they've been legal in Portugal and it's had some very good results, but I think you need to tailor all of these things to the culture of the country and just remember that every country is different. So what works in one country might not necessarily work in another. So I'm not someone that'll say I've got an answer to something or claim to know the answer to a complicated problem when really I'm just like everyone else and I haven't got a clue. I was a fucking idiot, basically. Like, I was a really stupid person. I was basically didn't even have any real reason to do all this. I was just young. I was trying to be rebellious, and I think my strict parenting had an influence. I think I was rebelling against that, and obviously the stuff that I talked about with my brother in childhood had sort of made it difficult for me to relax. So I was when you're a bit on edge and tense, you're sometimes looking for a sense of risk and a sense of doing something a bit edgy. I think that definitely played a part in things. But I'm just glad my life is not edgy now and it's relaxed. I can sit there in the evening with a cup of tea. I can relax and I don't have to look over my shoulder or worry about getting arrested for anything.